Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today is Friday, January 23rd, 2026. If you've been trying to keep your finger on the pulse of the African continent this week, you might be feeling a bit of whiplash.
Whiplash is a good word for it. It has absolutely been a week of extremes. I was just looking at the stack of reports on my desk this morning, and it feels like we're watching two different timelines play out at the same time.
How do you mean?
Well, on one hand, you have these incredibly sophisticated, forward-looking economic maneuvers. We're talking massive new trade deals, high-level talks on AI regulation.
And this idea of mineral sovereignty.
Exactly, which sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Right.
But it's very real economic policy. It's the sound of economies maturing, taking control of their own destiny.
Okay, so that's one timeline, the positive, ambitious one.
Yes. But then you look at the other side of the desk and you just see the fragility of it all. We're also looking at a week of, truly devastating climate events, political crackdowns, and entire communities literally being washed away.
It is a lot to process. So our mission today is to try and sift through this chaos. We need to reconcile these two realities, the ambition versus the grim reality on the ground in some places.
It really is this mix of resilience and fragility. You've got the African Union pushing this incredible strategy to stop exporting raw rocks and start exporting finished batteries.
And at the exact same time, in places like Mozambique or South Africa, the challenge isn't value addition.
No, the challenge is just keeping your head above water, literally.
So we have a lot to unpack. We're going to cover the severe flooding in southern Africa, the election tensions in Uganda, and the really interesting diplomatic fallout from the leadership change in Madagascar.
And later on, we have to do a proper deep dive into that new green mineral strategy coming from the AU.
Absolutely.
Because that is going to be the economic battleground of 2026. If you want to understand where the money is going for the next decade, you have to understand that strategy.
But first, we have to start with the most immediate and, frankly, tragic story of the week. The climate emergency unfolding in southern Africa.
It's a heartbreaking situation, and I want to be really clear here. When we say flooding, we're not talking about a few days of bad weather.
Oh.
We are seeing a systematic climate breakdown across the region. We're talking specifically about South Africa, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe.
The numbers that have been coming out are just staggering. I saw that confirmed deaths are already over 100 across the region.
They are, and Mozambique seems to be taking the brunt of it, which just feels like this cruel, recurring theme for them.
It always is. Geographically, they're just so exposed.
They are the drainage basin for so much of southern Africa. So the figures are grim. Since the rainy season kicked off late last year, they've reported 103 deaths.
Wow.
But it's not just the water. That's the thing. It's the compounding factors. We're seeing cholera outbreaks because sanitation systems are completely overwhelmed.
Right, contaminated water.
Exactly. Lightning strikes killing people who are exposed. Total infrastructure collapse. The World Food Program is now saying over 200,000 people have been directly affected.
And for a country so reliant on agriculture, I saw a figure, 70,000 hectares of crops are underwater.
Yes. And that isn't a problem for today. That's a food security crisis that's going to hit in 3 or 4 months.
That's the long tail of a disaster like this, isn't it?
Precisely. You drown 70,000 hectares, you've wiped out the harvest for the season. It's that cycle we talk about so often, a period of intense drought, so the ground is hard as a rock, followed by extreme flooding. The water has nowhere to go. It just runs off and takes everything with it.
Topsoil, seeds, homes.
Everything.
And in South Africa, the focus has really been on the Limpopo and Mpumalanga provinces. President Cyril Ramaphosa was actually touring Limpopo this week.
He was, and his description was chilling. He mentioned that in just one district, 36 houses were, and I'm quoting him here, wiped away from the face of the earth.
Wiped away. That phrase.
Yeah.
It really speaks to the sheer force of these floods.
It does. It's not just water rising. It's a destructive force. We're seeing bridges collapsing. Even the border post between Zimbabwe and South Africa at Bight Bridge, a major economic artery for the entire region, had to be evacuated. The water was just rising too fast.
And then there's the tourism sector. Kruger National Park had to evacuate about 600 people.
Tourists and staff, yeah. That image of safari vehicles being airlifted out or towed through deep water really drives the point home. Nature doesn't care about your vacation plans.
No, it doesn't. And what are the experts saying is the cause?
Well, the immediate meteorological cause is linked to the La Niña phenomenon. It tends to bring heavier rainfall to this part of Africa.
Okay.
But the broader context, of course, is climate vulnerability. Southern Africa is just swinging so violently between these extremes, and the infrastructure, the bridges, the drainage, the housing, it just isn't built to withstand this kind of punishment.
Okay, let's move north to East Africa, where the headline isn't the weather, it's the politics. We are right in the middle of the election fallout in Uganda.
We are. The general election was scheduled for January 15th. But the real story isn't just about the votes. It's about the information blackout.
The digital plug was pulled.
Completely. Just before the polls opened, the government shut down internet access nationwide.
And the official line from the authorities was what?
The official line was that they needed to prevent the spread of misinformation and violence.
A justification we seem to be hearing more and more in 2026.
It's become a standard tool in the political control toolkit, you know?
Yeah.
If you control the signal, you control the narrative. The opposition leader, Bobi Wine, was already warning of protests if the election was rigged.
And without the internet.
Without the internet, organizing those protests or even just documenting irregularities at polling stations becomes exponentially harder.
But here's where it gets interesting for the rest of the region. This wasn't just a domestic issue contained within Uganda's borders, was it?
Not at all. And this is a key point. The security crackdown and the internet blackout had a significant impact on regional trade.
How so?
Think about modern logistics. Truck drivers, customs agents, warehouse managers. They all rely on digital systems to process cargo, to clear goods. When the digital infrastructure in a key transit country like Uganda goes dark, the entire supply chain slows down.
So if you're a trader in Kenya trying to get goods to Rwanda or DRC,
You're stuck. We saw reports of traders having to stockpile inventory because they simply couldn't process the movement of their goods. It's a perfect example of how interconnected these economies have become. A political decision in Kampala directly hits a warehouse balance sheet in Nairobi.
speaking of political decisions with ripple effects, let's talk about Madagascar. We've been tracking this since President Andry Rajoelina was ousted late last year, but the diplomatic maneuvering really seemed to peak this week.
It's a fascinating case study in the question, what is a coup?
Right. So you have the new leader, Colonel Michael Randrianarina. He's the head of a powerful military unit, and his claim is that this wasn't a coup at all.
It's a purely legalistic argument, isn't it? He says the High Constitutional Court installed him after Parliament impeached the former president. So he's basically saying he followed the rule book.
He's ticking the boxes.
Technically, but the African Union is not buying it. They have a very strict zero-tolerance policy on unconstitutional changes of government. So for them, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck,
And wears a military uniform.
it's a coup. They've suspended Madagascar. They're taking a very hard line.
But the Southern African Development Community, SADC, is taking a different approach.
A much more pragmatic one. President Ramaphosa of South Africa actually met with Colonel Randrianarina in Pretoria on January 16th.
And the tone of that meeting wasn't get out.
Not at all. It was more, let's fix this.
Yeah.
SADC is pushing for a transition back to civilian rule, but within a 2-year time frame. They're choosing engagement over isolation.
And then, of course, you have the French connection.
Always a factor in Madagascar. France signed a renewed partnership agreement on January 19th. It looks like they're prioritizing stability and the delivery of basic services over a strict definition of legitimacy.
Well, that's the real twist in this story, isn't it? The reason Rajoelina was ousted in the first place was because of a Gen Z-led uprising.
Exactly.
And why were they on the streets? Not for some abstract political ideal. They were on the streets because there was no water and no electricity.
It was a fight for basic services. And here's the uncomfortable truth for democracy advocates. This new military-led government has actually managed to slightly improve the water and power supply in the last few weeks.
Which complicates the narrative.
It completely complicates the simple democracy versus autocracy narrative. If the coup leader is the one who turns the lights back on, the public might be a lot more forgiving than the African Union is.
That is a tension we are going to see playing out all year, I think. This idea of democracy versus delivery.
It's a fundamental question. If the democratically elected guy can't get water to your tap, but the colonel can, who do you support?
Let's zoom out a bit to the rest of the continent. The regional focus this week seems very heavy on diplomacy and security.
It is. The Horn of Africa in particular is heating up again.
Let's start there. Ethiopia and Djibouti. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed visited President Ismail Omar Guelleh on January 11th. Why was that visit so crucial right now?
It's all about access to the sea. You have to remember the recent tensions involving Somaliland and that port access MOU Ethiopia signed.
which angered Somalia and drew Egypt into the argument.
Right. Ethiopia is a massive, powerful country, but it's landlocked. Its economy depends on port access. Djibouti has always been its traditional lifeline, so Abiy is there to make sure that lifeline stays secure, especially now when the neighborhood is so volatile and alliances are shifting like sand.
And he's not the only major player visiting the region.
No, the Chinese foreign minister, Wang Yi, was also in Ethiopia and Tanzania earlier this month. Beijing is proposing what it calls a Horn of Africa peace initiative,
Cementing their role as a mediator.
and cementing what they call their all-weather partnership. It's a reminder of the different approaches. While the West often focuses on aid tied to democratic conditions or sanctions, China focuses on infrastructure and stability mediation. They pitch themselves as a neutral broker.
While we're in the Horn, Somalia is taking a huge step towards legitimacy.
This is a massive deal. It sounds like boring bureaucracy, but they're preparing for their first ever ICAO aviation safety audit this year.
What would passing that audit mean?
It would mean their airspace is certified as safe by the international governing body. It would open them up to international carriers, tourism, and cargo. It's a powerful symbol of rejoining the global community. It says, Somalia is open for business.
And economically, they're also making moves.
Yeah, they've put a cap on how much U.S. dollar cash banks can export $15 million per bank. It's an attempt to stabilize their own currency, the shilling, and build a real functioning monetary system after years of de facto dollarization.
Okay, let's move west to the Sahel. The news coming out of Mali is concerning.
Grim is the word I would use. Gold output, which is the lifeblood of their economy, plunged by 23%.
23%. That is a catastrophic drop. What's behind that?
It's a standoff between the junta and international mining companies like Barrick. The government brought in a new, stricter mining code. They want a bigger piece of the pie.
Resource nationalism.
Exactly. But they seem to be squeezing so hard that production is stalling. And the backdrop to this is even scarier. There are credible reports suggesting a real risk of territorial collapse in Mali as jihadist groups expand their control and the state just retreats.
And yet, politically, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, that junta belt, they seem to be digging in their heels together.
They're forming what they call the Sahel Alliance, and they are turning away from the West, decisively. Niger just appointed a new ambassador to Russia. The junta in Burkina Faso claimed it foiled an assassination plot against its leader, Ibrahim Traoré. These three are circling the wagons, and they are betting on Russia for security and on each other for survival.
Even as the security situation on the ground gets worse.
It's a very high-stakes gamble.
Heading up to North Africa, Libya is once again showing us its two very different faces.
It really is a land of extremes. On one hand, you have this massive economic news, a $2.7 billion partnership to develop the Misrata Free Zone, a huge logistics and manufacturing hub.
And on the other hand,
security forces discovered a secret prison in Kufra and freed over 200 migrants who were being held in just horrific, inhumane conditions.
it's that constant duality of Libya, isn't it?
It is. They're trying to build a modern economy. They even devalued their currency, the dinar, by almost 15% this week to fix fiscal imbalances. You can sign a billion-dollar deal in the morning and find a secret prison in the afternoon. The rule of law is still incredibly patchy.
And just quickly on Morocco, they seem to be racking up some diplomatic wins.
They are. They signed a joint military plan with Israel, strengthening those ties. And they just got diplomatic support from Sweden for their Western Sahara autonomy plan. Morocco is playing a very sophisticated game right now, engaging both West and East and the Middle East all at the same time.
All right, let's shift gears to business and economy. We touched on Kenya earlier, but we need to properly unpack this new trade deal with China.
This is probably the biggest single economic headline of the week. Kenya signed a preliminary trade agreement with China that grants 98.2% of Kenyan goods duty-free access to the Chinese market.
98.2%. That's almost everything.
It's almost everything. This is a direct result of President Ruto's visit to Beijing. For years, the big complaint has been that the trade relationship is completely one way. China sends Kenya everything from electronics to clothes, and Kenya sends back very little. This is a massive attempt to fix that imbalance.
But the big question now is, does Kenya actually have enough products to export to take advantage of that access?
That is the billion-dollar question, isn't it? Access is one thing, production capacity is another. You can have duty-free access for your avocados, but if you don't have the avocados or you don't have the cold chain logistics to get them to Shanghai fresh, then the deal is just a piece of paper.
There was also some interesting data out on Kenya's private sector. The Stanbic PMI showed strong growth at the start of the year. But there's a paradox in the numbers.
The job growth paradox, yeah.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Investment in major capital projects, think big infrastructure, massive new factories, that's actually slowing down.
Yeah.
Investors seem a bit wary of the big ticket items. But job creation is picking up in smaller, more labor-intensive ventures. It suggests the economy is shifting. The so-called hustle economy, the small-scale enterprises, that's where the growth is right now, even if the mega projects are on hold.
You know, one country that is quietly winning in the background is Tanzania.
It's a great quiet success story. They were just ranked in Group A of the World Bank's GovTech Maturity Index for 2025.
Okay, what does that mean in plain English?
It means they're really good at using digital technology in their government operations. Things like digitizing records, offering services online, creating more transparency. While some of its neighbors are having very noisy political fights, Tanzania is just quietly making the government work better for its citizens.
Efficient bureaucracy might not be sexy, but it's what drives real growth.
Absolutely.
Let's talk innovation in tech. There's a fascinating story coming out of Kenya's Capital Markets Authority, the CMA.
This is a classic case of a regulator trying to catch up with reality. The CMA is rolling out a whole new set of reforms for retail foreign exchange trading.
Why now? What's the driver?
The driver is AI. The rise of these new, easily accessible AI-enabled trading tools has brought a huge wave of young retail traders into the market. They're jumping into complex Forex markets using these bots that promise massive returns.
And presumably getting burned.
Many of them are. They're losing money they really can't afford to lose, so the regulator is stepping in to try and prevent predatory practices. It's this perfect storm of Gen Z, artificial intelligence, and finance.
And speaking of finance friction, there was a bit of drama with Visa and Uber in Kenya this week.
A temporary disruption, yeah. Visa cards just stopped working on the Uber app for a while. It seems like a minor thing, but it really highlights how fragile this new digital payment ecosystem can be. So many urban Africans rely on these platforms for their daily lives now. When the API between two giant companies breaks, the city literally stops moving for a lot of people.
I also want to touch on the Africa CDC. They seem to be really leaning into the media space.
They are. They're pushing their Africa Public Health podcast. And it's interesting because they've identified digital innovation as a core pillar of health security. They've realized that public health isn't just about vaccines and clinics, it's about communication.
It's about owning the narrative.
Exactly. Telling Africa's health story from within Africa rather than letting international NGOs or foreign media be the only voices.
You know, that's a perfect segue into our culture and society segment. We have to talk about the safari ban in Kenya.
This is going to upset a lot of tourists, I think. Kenya's Tourism Regulatory Authority is cracking down on those iconic, open-sided land cruisers.
The ones you always see in the pictures. Wind in your hair, perfect view of the giraffes.
That's the one. Tourists love them for the view, for the romance of that whole out-of-Africa vibe. The problem is they are incredibly unsafe on high-speed tarmac highways.
So it's a clash between the romanticized image of the safari and modern safety regulations.
Precisely. It's a sign of a country maturing, in a way. You can't have a modern highway network and still run 1970s-style open Jeeps on it at 100 kilometers an hour. The two things don't go together.
Just to look back briefly at Madagascar, we mentioned the political side, but in the cultural context, it's so important to remember this was a Gen Z uprising.
It is. We're seeing this trend across the continent. We saw it in Kenya with the finance bill protests in 2024, now Madagascar.
It's a different kind of politics.
It is. Young people are not waiting for the next election cycle. If the water stops flowing or the taxes get too high, they are hitting the streets. That demographic pressure is the real engine of change right now, for better or for worse.
Okay, it is time for our in-depth analysis. We've been teasing this all show. The topic is the green minerals strategy.
This is the big one. And the core theme here is a shift from what's often called the paradox of plenty to a new era of mineral sovereignty.
And our source for this is a major speech given by the AU Commissioner for Economic Development, Francisca Tatuap Belob. She was speaking at a mining conference in Chad on January 21st.
And she laid out the problem with brutal, undeniable clarity. Africa produces 70% of the world's cobalt.
70%. Just let that sink in. That is the dominant share of the market. You cannot make an electric vehicle battery without it.
You can't. And yet, the continent captures less than 3% of the total battery market value.
That is a painful statistic. You have 70% of the raw material, but you only see 3% of the money.
That's it. You dig it up, you put it on a boat, you ship it out, and then you buy back the finished battery for 10, 20 times the price. Commissioner Belob is essentially saying this has to end, and the AU's strategy is fourfold.
Let's break it down. What's the first part?
First is what they call the green mineral shift. This is about building regional electric vehicle value chains. Don't just export the raw rock, process it here. Build the cathode precursors, maybe even assemble the battery cells on the continent.
Which requires huge amounts of energy and infrastructure.
It does, which leads to the second point, developmental mining. This links directly back to our story about Mali. Mining codes must be rewritten to protect citizens and ensure development for the local communities. It can't just be about royalties flowing to the capital city.
Okay, so value addition and community development. What's third?
The AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area. Her argument is brilliant. She says that individual countries might be too small to support a massive world-class refinery on their own.
Right, they don't have the economies of scale.
Exactly. But if you use the free trade area, you can build a giant refinery in, say, the DRC that services the cobalt and copper from both the DRC and neighboring Zambia. You create a continental-scale industry.
That makes a lot of sense. And the fourth point?
Artisanal mining. They want to formalize it. Look, millions of people, many of them women and youth, work in artisanal mining. It's often dangerous and unregulated. By formalizing it, you protect the workers, improve safety, and bring all that gold or cobalt or coltan into the formal economy where it can be taxed and regulated.
So bringing it all together, what's the big so what for our listeners? What does this all mean?
It means that 2026 is the year that Africa, as a bloc, is trying to fundamentally flip the economic script. If the continent misses this EV battery wave, if it remains just an extraction pit for the rest of the world's green transition, it's a historic missed opportunity. The AU is calling for political will from its member states to reject deals that don't include local value addition.
That is a powerful call to action, and it leads us perfectly to our quote of the week.
It comes from that same speech by Commissioner Belob in Chad. She said simply, "The strategy for African countries is clear. Own the value chain."
Short, sharp, to the point.
It's a declaration of intent. She went on to say that Africa must stop being just the heartbeat of the global energy transition. A heartbeat is essential, it keeps the body alive, but it doesn't get the glory or the nutrition. She wants Africa to be the muscle and the brain of the operation, too.
Looking ahead to next week and beyond, what should we be keeping our eyes on?
Well, the diplomatic calendar is definitely heating up. The 39th AU Summit is happening in Addis Ababa from February 11th to the 15th. Expect this mineral sovereignty topic to be front and center on the agenda.
We're also waiting for the results of that ICAO safety audit in Somalia.
That could be a huge game changer for their economy. Also, keep an eye on Madagascar. The new military leader promised a national dialogue would begin in May. The clock is ticking on that promise.
And sadly, a grim milestone in Sudan. The war there has now passed the 1,000-day mark. The UN envoy is in Cairo trying to find a path forward, but it looks like a very long road ahead.
It does, but we have to keep watching.
So as we wrap up this very packed deep dive, what is the one big takeaway you're left with?
I think the overarching theme is a trajectory of reclaiming agency. Whether it's the AU demanding a share of the value chain for its minerals, or Kenya negotiating direct market access to China, or Somalia taking control of its own aviation standards. There is a clear and consistent push to own the narrative and to own the economics.
There's always a but.
There is, but this growing resilience is being tested every single day by what some people call the poly crisis. You have the agency to sign a great trade deal, but does your infrastructure have the resilience to survive the next climate-driven flood?
Right. You have the political will to process your own minerals, but do you have the security and stability in the Sahel to even keep the mines open?
That is the fundamental tension, agency versus reality.
So I'll leave you, our listeners, with a final thought to chew on. As we watch countries like Mali and Niger turn inward, or look east toward Russia, and at the same time we see countries like Kenya and Morocco engaging with the West and the East simultaneously, are we seeing the end of a unified African foreign policy? Or are we actually witnessing the birth of a more pragmatic, more transactional era, where every nation simply fights for its own best interest?
A massive question.
It is. We'll leave you with that one. Stay curious, stay informed, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Goodbye.